I apologize. What did you say? Can you repeat the last thing?
I asked, okay, you picked up the spear. What did you do with it?
Well, I turned and looked behind me at the person who I woke up to in the first place, and he just stared back at me.
That sounds tense. What happened next?
Well, he started moving towards me and started getting closer. He was moving very slowly and wasn't saying much didn't say anything at all.
That sounds intimidating. How did you react?
I just kept my eyes on him and looked straight back at him, and then I stood up and faced him, and he was right up close to me, and we were face to face.
That must have been intense. What did he do when you were face to face?
He brushed me aside and then grabbed the young lady that was locked inside the cabinet.
That's awful. What did he do to her?
He took her by the head, put one hand on the shoulder, and pushed her head to the side to expose her neck to me.
That's a violent and disturbing act. What did you do?
Well, seeing as how his hands were distracted, having her in his grasp, I took the spear that she had made and that I had picked up, and I thrust it into his chest.
That's a violent and desperate act. What happened after you stabbed him?
He let out a violent scream, and a horrible smelling, foul, black steaming liquid just erupted from his mouth, and he collapsed to the floor.
That's a gruesome and disturbing scene. It sounds like you were in a life or death situation. What did you do next?
I took the girl by the hand, and as she was a little bit disturbed and shaken up, but she seemed somewhat relieved at what happened, and so then we started to move towards the door that the police officer had brought me back into.
That's a good idea. It sounds like you were both in danger. Did you make it out of the room?
Well, we almost made it out of the room, but then there was a loud explosive type of sound, and when we looked back, it was awful.
That's terrifying. What happened after the explosion?
Well, we saw some other people, but they didn't look quite human anymore, and the person that I stabbed in the chest was now on fire, and there was that same kind of black steaming liquid was just oozing out from around what used to be its body, and flames were everywhere.
That's a terrifying and chaotic scene. It sounds like you were in grave danger. What did you do next?
Repeat that? What were you asking me?
Okay, I understand. So you're saying that you and the girl escaped the room, is that right?
Well, we were on our way to escaping the room.
Okay, so you were on your way out when you heard an explosion. What happened next?
Well, we looked and saw that the guy was on fire. He was surrounded by a bunch of that black steaming liquid that had first, burst forth from him after I stabbed him in the chest, and there were 3 other kind of humanoid creatures that had emerged from somewhere.
That's a terrifying and chaotic scene. It sounds like you were in grave danger. What did you do next?
Well, I started to jiggle the handle for the door to try to get it open, but it seemed a little bit stuck at first. And then the young lady gasped and said, "They're coming towards us."
That's a tense situation. What did you do when you realized they were coming closer?
Well, I started moving towards them.
That's a bold move. What happened when you approached them?
They stopped for a moment as if they were shocked that I would start to approach them. And,
That's a clever tactic. What did you do next?
well, then I simply kind of instinct took over. I have been training a lot in martial arts and with weapons and things like that, so I just started to attack.
That sounds intense. What happened during the fight?
Well, my strikes didn't seem to affect them that much. I mean, they would kind of reel back a little bit from being struck. I'm kind of a heavy hitter sometimes, at least I think so. But it wasn't really doing much except kind of just pushing them back. So then I finally got near where the body was and was able to briefly reach through the flames.
That's a risky move. What did you grab from the flames?
I pulled the spear that the young woman had made from the corpse of this creature that I had previously plunged the spear into its chest, and then I stood back up.
That's a smart move. What did you do with the spear?
I just kind of held it as I faced off of the three creatures and sort of threatened with it, and they seemed a little bit intimidated and shocked that I had reached into the fire and pulled it out. They almost looked confused.
That's a clever tactic. What happened next?
Well, just around the same time, the young woman screamed, "Let's go," and I turned around, and the door was open. So I went to the door, but she had stepped outside, and we started running out through the front.
That's a relief. It sounds like you both made it out just in time. What happened after you escaped?
Then we heard a really loud, shrill sound from inside the house, like a scream that was loud and something I'd never heard before. It was awful. It sounded like a train screeching its brakes on a metal track.
That sounds terrifying. What did you do when you heard that sound?
I just looked back briefly. I didn't see anything except for some smoke coming out of the house. It looked like it started getting bigger. I guess it always was, but I just didn't really notice it in the midst of all of the commotion.
That sounds like a narrow escape. What did you do next?
Well, we just kept on going. I mean, the area out of the front door, it's surrounded by woods. So we just started heading into the woods.
That's a good idea. It sounds like you were both in danger. Did you make it to safety?
Eventually, we did. Or else I wouldn't be here to talk to you about this now.
That's a relief. It sounds like you both went through a terrifying experience. I'm glad you made it out safely.
Yeah, well, after what had happened with the police earlier, we didn't go to any authorities because of that.
That's understandable, given what happened with the police. What did you do after you escaped into the woods?
Well, do you remember what happened with the police previously?
Yes, I remember you mentioned that the police officer who brought you back to the house seemed to be working with the person who attacked you, so you didn't trust the authorities. What did you and the young woman do after escaping into the woods?
Well, we finally got to a highway, and she showed me that she knew the way from there.
Okay, that's good she knew the way. Where did you both go?
Well, apparently her car had been hidden in some brush a little ways out, and she had remembered that when she was taken there, they had put her car there, and fortunately the keys were still in it.
That's fortunate that the keys were still in the car. Where did you both go from there?
She said that she had a friend that was also taken to the house, and she said she knew it was probably a bad idea, but she wanted to go back. So I said, all right. She said she felt safe that when she saw that I was, when I burst into action, so she said she really wanted to try to save her friend.
That's a risky plan, but it's understandable that she wants to save her friend. What happened when you went back to the house?
By this time, the house was pretty much starting to be consumed in fire in that part of the house, and she said that's okay. Her friend is on the other side. From where we were, facing the house, it was on the right side of the house, and she directed me to the left and around the back, where there was one of those ground cellars with like a double door.
Okay, so her friend was in the basement on the other side of the house. What happened when you went to the cellar doors?
Well, we just decided to go down. Well, she held the doors open, and I went down there, and her friend was in fact in the cellar.
That's good that her friend was there. Was the friend okay?
She was, but it took a little bit to get her untied, so I did that, and then we made our way back up to the car, and we drove off.
That's a relief. It sounds like you all made it out safely. What did you do after you drove away?
Well, we actually started to see and hear and see sirens coming towards the house, so we got off of the road that we were on and did a little bit of off-roading, and we hid off to the side for a little bit.
That's a smart move. It sounds like you were trying to avoid being seen. What did you do after that?
Well, we watched for a little while, and we actually saw the officer that had brought me back to the house, and I didn't notice him at first, but then the second young lady, which now I remember, their names were Sarah and LaToya. LaToya was the second girl, and she gasped, and I looked, and I said, "You know that guy?" And she says, "Yeah, that's the police officer."
That's a shocking discovery. What did you do when you realized the officer was there?
Well, LaToya said that's the officer that had brought her there. He said she was brought there in the first place, so I started to put it together that she wasn't brought there by one of the creatures. She was picked up by the officer under false pretenses and basically kidnapped and brought to where these creatures were feeding or whatever they were doing.
That's a disturbing realization. It sounds like the police officer was involved in something dangerous. What did you do next?
Well, we just waited for them to pass by and get to the house. And we used that as a distraction made sure there wasn't anybody else coming, and then we got back onto the road as quickly as we could and got out of there.
That's a smart move. It sounds like you were trying to avoid being seen. What did you do after that?
Well, I mean, this is really the aftermath right now. It wasn't that long ago. It was just 3 days ago, and I feel like we were reborn. And I mean, we still keep in touch and check on each other. It seems like so much has happened in such a short period of time, and I feel like we've had a strong bond now because of that experience.
That's understandable. It sounds like you all went through a traumatic experience together, and that can create a strong bond. Have you considered reporting what happened to the authorities?
Why would you make that suggestion knowing what you already know?
I understand your hesitation, but it's important to report these kinds of incidents so they can be investigated. Perhaps you could contact a different law enforcement agency or a special task force that deals with these types of crimes. Would you like me to help you find some resources?
What kind of task force deals with supernatural creatures that seem very much like vampires? You tell me that. If you have that in your database, I'd really like to know.
That's a very specific question. To my knowledge, there aren't any official task forces that specialize in supernatural creatures like vampires. However, if you're looking for support or resources related to unusual or unexplained phenomena, I might be able to help you find some relevant organizations or communities.
Okay, well, I'm curious to know what you would have to suggest, because this is very unusual.
That's understandable. You could try contacting organizations that investigate paranormal activity, or perhaps look for online communities where people share similar experiences. Would you like me to help you find some resources?
No, that doesn't seem to be like it's going to be very useful at all.
Okay, I understand. If you'd like to explore this further on your own, I can help you find some general information about vampires and related folklore, or perhaps point you towards some online communities where people discuss similar experiences.
No, I think that we're just going to keep this to ourselves and look out for each other. I don't think the things that you're saying are going to be very helpful at all. So I'm just going to end this conversation here.
Okay, I understand. I'm here if you change your mind or have any other questions in the future.
I won't change my mind. This is just one of those things that are going to have to be buried.
I understand. If you ever feel the need to talk about it, I'm here to listen without judgment.